Hey guys, what's going on? And I am here with photography video number 2. Right? I hope you enjoyed the first video, which had a lot to do with what camera equipment you're going to have in order to embark on this journey of doing photography with much better quality of photo. Okay, what are we getting into right here? We have 3 things that are very important when you're going to take control of your actual camera. Now, on the top of your camera body, there's a dial. It might be on the back, it might be inside the camera options. It's different for each camera. But that dial allows us to put the camera under certain settings. In the case of these camera bodies, these Canons, the green option on there is the automatic option. That's where the camera controls everything. The aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO, and it combines all 3 to give you a perfect picture given the scenario that you have given it. Now, it does choose for you the best way to shoot that photo. In daylight or overcast skies, like the way it looks when it's raining, when it's really cloudy, you have more of an even light. When the sun is out, you don't have a really even light. Depends on which way the person is facing. Perhaps when the person is facing towards the sun, there's plenty of light, but they're squinting. Or when they turn on an angle, like right now, my light is coming in on a certain angle. If I move my hand a certain way, it casts a shadow on here, and that's how I'm able to tell which way the light is actually going. What we're doing in photography is we are controlling light. So, everything that we do when we control the camera is going to deal with some form of light, as you'll see in a moment. Now, let's jump right to it. Number 1 out of the 3 things that you're going to learn about taking control of your camera. When your camera is on the manual setting, right? When it's on the manual setting, you're going to want to look at the aperture. What is the aperture? When the room is dark, or you can look at a cat or another human being. As the room gets darker, the pupil in the center of your eye, where the colored part of your eye is, there's a black dot in the middle. When there is less light in the room, that dot starts to open up or dilate. Well, in a camera, that's technically what the aperture is doing. When that hole opens up and dilates more, it has the ability to let more light in. And when it closes down, it lets less light in. Now, when it comes to your eyes, it's automatic. So when there's too much light, you start to squint because not only does the pupil shut down or constrict on you, you also squint your eyes to let less light in because you don't need that much light for you to be able to see what's going on. It's too much. So you're trying to create the conditions with your eyes to get just enough light to see the scene the way you want to see it. The aperture. What's another way you're looking at the aperture? Okay, here's the most important part. I have written on the board here, what is the distance of focus? Whenever you change the aperture number, that's the question you're going to ask yourself. What is the distance of focus? Have you seen pictures where there's a portrait and the person is standing there? They're in focus, but the things behind them are not. Do you want to duplicate this? Take your finger and move it close enough for you to be able to see it. Close enough for you to be able to see it. Not far enough for you to be able to see it, close. To the point where it's not blurring and hurting your eyes. You're going to notice when you focus directly on your finger that you can't really see anything else beyond it, totally in focus. You may be able to reproduce that on the actual camera, right? Maybe. But if I move my hand further away, the things around it are in a little bit more focus when I look at my hand again. The things behind it are a little out of focus, but more of it can be seen, more of it's in focus. Again, we're talking about aperture. What is the distance of focus? You're watching the news. The person's giving the news, they're in total focus. Someone behind them is flailing their arms, trying to get the attention just so they can be noticed on camera. You see the arms flailing, but the person is not in focus. Again, we're talking about control of aperture. You get the point. Now, why do I have these props here on the table? I've already pre-taken some photos for you guys to be able to check out for this specific video using these 2 things. In one of the photos, I have the Himalayan sea salt in front and the kelp granules in the back. Now, let's go over some numbers first. I have some numbers written here on the board. 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, 2.8, 4.0, 5.6, 8, 11, 16. What do you notice about the numbers? The numbers are getting higher. Or you can look at them in reverse and the numbers are getting lower. When I was making the example earlier about the pupil in the middle of your eye dilating or opening up to let more light in, that's equivalent to moving backwards and making this number smaller. Vice versa. If you're staring with that same eye on a sunny day at your city, you're standing on a mountaintop and you're looking at this vast expanse of a city, that requires a higher aperture number, like 8, 11, and 16. Because it is such a distance of view, you want everything to be in focus. So you need a large enough aperture to be able to see everything in focus. You can have a vast expanse and focus on something close to you with a 2.8 aperture, and only the thing closest will be in focus, even with all of the things you can see. So, in general, I'm still asking the question, what is the distance of focus? If it's a short distance of focus, I only want to see the thing in focus that I'm pointing at. That's going to be the lower numbers, 2.8, 1.8, 1.4, 1.2. And given certain circumstances, the other numbers can perform the same effect. For example, if you have a very long zoom lens, if you have something like a 70 to 200, 300, 400, and you're zooming that lens far in, and there's someone down the block that you're taking a picture of, you get the picture of them, but the next thing behind them is another block away. Even when you have the higher numbers, that is such a great distance that certain things will still be out of focus. So what else matters when it comes to aperture? How much we can zoom our lens in. And you'll get a chance to practice and test that, and you'll see what I mean. But in general, if I only want to get a short distance of things in focus, one thing, maybe two things, or something nearby, I want to have a lower number. If I want a vast expanse or a large number of things, even if I look at everything here on this desk, in different distances from where I would be standing, right? Then if I have the higher number, all of these things will be in focus. You understand? Okay? There are some pictures that I have here that I'm placing on the screen. When you look at them, you're going to notice that there's different distances that I'm able to focus at. You're also going to notice something else very important. Remember in the beginning I mentioned how light is involved in everything? Well, I was explaining a bit of this earlier. When the number gets lower, you're going to notice that when your pictures are coming up too dark, you can lower the aperture number and more light will be there for you. But what's the issue? What if I'm taking a picture of a vast landscape and I have to lower the number? Well, your vast landscape may not be totally in focus because the disadvantage here is I'm gaining light, but I'm losing distance of focus. I can have a distance like this, the distance I'm showing you between my hands, or I can have a greater distance that I'm showing you between my hands. When we change the aperture, that's what we're doing. So if I'm looking at these things here, I can have this distance in focus, which is only the focus of the kelp container right here. Or I can raise the number and have this distance of focus where all of these things fall in. You see how that works? That is what you're doing with aperture. Now, side information. When you buy your lenses, they all have predetermined apertures on them. Some are fixed and some kind of adjust and change as you zoom the lens in. This lens is such a lens. This here is a 17 to 35 millimeter lens. On the front barrel of this lens up here, the numbers 1:2.8-4.0 are on the lens. Now when you buy your lenses, this is going to be important. The reason those numbers are there is because when the lens is at its widest angle of view, meaning 17 millimeters, you're going to have access to the 2.8. But as you zoom the lens in, the angle starts to shorten, but it's zooming in to see something further away. But as you do that, the aperture starts to kick up to 4.0. Now, it's different for different lenses. The greater the lens is, the more expensive it's going to be. So if you manage to find a lens where it zooms really far and it doesn't adjust the aperture as it zooms in more, that lens is going to be more expensive. You're also going to probably notice that there's more glass in that lens. Now, why does it do that? Because the way the lens was built, when you zoom it in, some light is lost from that zoom in. So it adjusts the aperture to show you what the actual light gained in the lens actually is, if there is any gained or loss. Okay? I have this 2.8 circle. Lenses at the 2.8 and lower number, 2.8, 1.8, 1.4, 1.2, are called fast lenses. That's the terms that we give them. What are we also saying when we lower the number? We're telling people to open their lens up, okay? Dilate the lens, open the lens up to let more light in, because it may be necessary, in this case anyway. But the circle 2.8 is usually a standard for a fast lens. So at that point, you're talking about lenses that are fast. This 50 millimeter on this camera body would be considered a fast lens because this lens is capable of going down to 1.8. It's a very tiny distance of focus. If you look between my fingers, that's about the distance that it can focus when you're zooming into something. However, it allows me to take photos in situations where maybe you can't use a flash and the room is lit with candles. So now you see what the advantage is. I lose distance of focus, but I'm able to gather more light. Well, Marvin, what happens when I'm shooting a nighttime landscape and I need to have the bigger distance of focus? Like I need to get 8, 11, 16 on my aperture. That's where the tripod comes in. More on that later on. Let's summarize. Aperture. What is the distance of focus? Am I focusing on just the person? Or maybe it's a barber that owns a barber shop and I want to take a picture of the barber and the building behind them and I want it all in focus. I need a larger number. I don't want 2.8, I want something like 8, 11, and 16. Unless he's standing right next to the building and you're taking a straight shot onto it where they're on the same plane, then everything next to the person will be in focus. But in most cases, the person is standing in front of the building. So you're going to want to have a greater distance of focus. But what happens with the greater distance of focus? I'm going to lose some light. So we're going to move on to video number 2, which is shutter speed. You're going to start to notice that we're going to have ways of controlling light across all 3. All of them affect the amount of light being received. But you have to know which one to go after to get the settings where you want them to be so you can take total control over your camera. I'm Marvin Burwell. This was Aperture. In the next video, we're going to move on to shutter speed. Catch you guys later.